Today, we will explore the topic of the most well-known Metis figure in Canadian history and controversy, as well as the major historic events that this figure played a big part in. To some people, Riel was a hero, and to some, he was a rebel who defied authority. Regardless of either, there is no denying the impact that he left on the course of Canadian history. So let's begin with the Red River Resistance, also known as the Manitoba Resistance. Riel was born on the 22nd of October, 1844. He lived in the Red River Colony, which was where the majority of the Metis people inhabited ever since the early 1800s. The Red River Colony was a district in Rupert's Land, which was owned by the Hudson's Bay Company. By the 1850s, the Hudson's Bay Company's rule over Rupert's Land was under attack from Britain, Canada, and the United States, and by the 1860s, it had agreed to surrender its monopoly over Rupert's Land. This was an important turning point, as it is the biggest landmass to be bought by Canada in its entire history. However, this also sparked the beginning of two major resistances. Due to lengthy negotiations to transfer Rupert's Land to Canada, Protestant settlers, which were essentially Christians that rejected the authority of the Pope of Rome, started to move into the colony. Their obtrusive and aggressive behavior led the Roman Catholic Metis to want to preserve their religion, land rights, and culture. However, nobody made an effort to ease their worries. The trade of Rupert's Land was made as if nobody was there. In August of 1869, the concern of the Metis grew worse when the government attempted to resurvey the settlement's riverlot farms, which would essentially make them lose their farms. Many Metis feel that they did not have a clear title with their land. While Ottawa intended to respect Metis' occupancy rights, no assurances were made for this to be the case. Additionally, William McDougall, a Canadian expansionist, was appointed as the territory's first lieutenant governor, making the Metis people worried and angered. Eventually, in November of 1869, Riel stepped up as a Metis spokesman, leading a group to prevent McDougall and a land survey party from entering the Red River Colony. This inspired resistors who seized Upper Fort Garry to keep their positions until the Canadian government finally decided to negotiate. Soon, Riel was brought into an election convention in December, and the decision to form a provisional representative government was made. It discussed terms of entry of the Red River Colony into a confederation with the Canadian government. However, conflict continued over that winter, with Protestants engaging in armed battles with the Metis of Red River Colony. Riel seemed to be in control of the situation until he made the blunder of executing an Ontarian prisoner by the name of Thomas Scott. This execution inflamed anger amongst the other Protestants in Ontario. Canadian authorities were still willing to negotiate with Riel, but refused to grant him unconditional amnesty. Soon enough, Riel was widely denounced as Thomas Scott's murderer, and a reward of $5,000 was offered for his arrest. In Quebec, he was seen as a hero and a defender of the Roman Catholic faith and French culture. However, for now, he would be in voluntary exile in America in order to resist arrest. His exile only lasted 4 months, as Riel was encouraged by family, friends, and Quebecois supporters to enter politics. He was elected into federal riding of Provencher by election in October of 1863 and was re-elected in February of 1874. However, before Riel could take his seat, Protestant Mackenzie Bowell introduced a motion that would later cause him to be expelled from the House of Commons. In March of 1870, continuous negotiations with the Canadian government in Ottawa recognized the land rights of Red River settlers. The Manitoba Act, which allowed the creation of Manitoba around the Red River Colony, was a milestone, granting them a degree of freedom. It was a huge geographical and political change to Canada, and it made a mark for the Metis, a mark that will not be forgotten in Canadian history. That was the Red River Resistance, the Metis, and Riel. The story doesn't quite end yet. Another major historical event inspired by Riel was to happen sometime later in the course of history, and very soon. The Northwest or Saskatchewan resistance in 1885 was also caused by the lack of land rights for Metis people. To begin with the resistance, we must first understand the issue. For the Metis living in the Northwest, their great bison herd had disappeared, leading them to starvation. As well, much of their land had been signed away by treaties, and their once vast land had been replaced with farms, fences, railways, and towns. Meanwhile, the Metis residing in the Red River Colony, which was now Manitoba, still felt vulnerable a decade later. Their old lives as fur traders for the HBC were disappearing, as well as their bison herds. They anticipated help from the federal government, but were denied. So, in 1884, the Métis of Saskatchewan brought Louis Riel back to Canada from exile in America. In turn, Riel encouraged the dissatisfied Métis people to press their case on Sir John A. Macdonald for neglecting their worries, concerns, and grievances. In fall of the same year, Riel prepared a petition and urged Métis and non-Métis settlers to sign it. In March of 1885, the Métis passed a revolutionary Bill of Rights, asserting Métis' rights of possession to their farms and more demands including, and I quote, that the land department of the Dominion government be administered as far as practicable from Winnipeg so that the settlers may not be compelled, as heretofore, to go to Ottawa for the settlement of question in dispute between them and the land commissioner. Following that, an armed force of Métis formed a provisional government, seized the church at Batoche, and demanded the surrender of a nearby Hudson's Bay post located in Fort Carleton. Riel was declared as president of his provisional government, and Gabriel Dumont was installed as military commander. Logically, the Métis resistance already anticipated a sort of police intervention, but knowing that they would be arriving from the east by rail, they occupied the community of Duck Lake between Batoche and Carleton. On the morning of March 6, 1885, a force of about 100 Northwest Mounted Police and armed citizen volunteers moved towards Duck Lake under the command of Superintendent Leif Crozier. They attempted to negotiate, but it ended in confusion. A battle ensued, but was quickly stopped when 9 volunteers and 3 police were killed, with many more injured. The police quickly retreated, and the Métis did not follow. Instead, they moved to Fort Battleford. Back in Ottawa, military mobilization began, and the Canadian Pacific Railway manager, William Van Horn, quickly arranged for Canadian troops to be transported across unfinished gaps in the railway, enabling them to reach Quebec in Saskatchewan. By the 10th of April, almost 5,000 troops, commanded by General Frederick Middleton, had been transported west from Ontario, Quebec, and Nova Scotia. His plan was simple. He wanted to march his troops north from the railhead at Quebec to Batoche, but due to recent Indigenous battles nearby, he was forced to send a large group north from the second railhead to relieve Battleford. They set off on the 15-kilometer march on the 23rd of April, where 900 men were split into 2 groups, one for each side of the river. The Métis were determined to fight, but differed about where to make a stand. Dumont's plan was to have a more forward position by ambushing Torrance Goulet, which was known as Fish Creek, 20 kilometers south of Batoche, where Middleton's troops would soon arrive. As Middleton's scouts arrived, the Métis opened fire. 6 were killed and 49 were wounded, while the resistors only had 4 killed. Middleton thought it would be reasonable to retreat. The Métis held their ground, and ultimately, Middleton's advance stopped. While the Métis were camping in Batoche for the time being, Middleton's men were set back by other issues, which prompted them to wait 2 weeks before attacking Batoche. The Métis fought back, but ultimately surrendered as they were short of ammunition and supplies. Louis Riel surrendered along with his people, but Dumont fled to Montana. After that, the government prosecuted Louis Riel and Regina and put him in court for high treason. Riel's lawyers failed to defend him, and he was sentenced to be hanged. The Métis people were ultimately unsuccessful in their attempts to rebel against the government. Resistance against the government from the Metis finally came to an end. Riel's death and Dumont's exile led the Metis in the Red River colony to struggle, along with the Metis in Saskatchewan, which was previously the Northwest. To this day, many Métis people have been affected by the government. The broken promises, false treaties, and disregard for rights will remain as a scar to the Métis for a very long time. Although these events were processes in Canadian history, the Métis people are not a process, but real people who will carry the story on with them through their scars and their tales. Riel's legacy as the founding father of Manitoba and a hero will forever be remembered and respected by many across Canada, especially the Métis. His statue remains standing to this day in Assiniboine Avenue, Manitoba.